The day I started doubting my wife, I wasn't snooping through her phone, reading suspicious messages, or noticing any dramatic change in her behavior. No, it was something much simpler, something that could have easily been dismissed, except it wasn't. It was a small detail, something that sat in the back of my mind like a splinter, and once it was there, I couldn't shake it. It all started with a knock at the door. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet night. Laura was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she chopped vegetables for dinner. The kids were upstairs, lost in their world of video games and homework. Everything was normal, peaceful. But then came the knock. It wasn't a casual knock, the kind you hear when a neighbor stops by to borrow something. It was deliberate, firm, almost hesitant, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be knocking at all. I glanced at Laura, who had suddenly frozen in place, knife hovering midair above the cutting board. Her face lost a bit of color, just for a second, but I caught it. It was quick, subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. I wiped my hands on my pants and made my way to the door, expecting to see a delivery guy or maybe a political campaigner. Instead, when I pulled it open, I was greeted by a man I had never seen before. He was around my age, maybe a little younger, well-dressed, but not overly formal, like he had put thought into looking casual. His eyes flickered past me, searching, and when they landed on something behind me, I felt, rather than saw, Laura stiffen. The man hesitated before speaking, and when he did, his voice was measured, too polite, like he was forcing himself to act normal. "Hey, sorry to just show up like this. I was just in the area and thought I'd stop by." I frowned. The way he said it, the way his eyes kept darting behind me, it felt wrong. People don't just stop by houses they've never been to before. "Do I know you?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. No, not really," he said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know Laura." And just like that, everything in the room shifted. I turned slightly, looking at my wife. She was standing at the entrance of the kitchen now, her hands gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't speaking. She was just staring at this man, her lips slightly parted, her breathing shallow. I had seen her face in every possible emotion over the years: joy, sadness, anger, frustration, but this was new. This was something I couldn't place. "You know my wife?" My voice was steady, but inside, something cold was spreading through my chest. The man hesitated again, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, we work together. I was just, dropping something off." I studied him, taking in the way his body was angled, not toward me, but toward her. The way his hands twitched slightly, the nervous energy radiating off him like he had walked into something he hadn't planned for. I turned to Laura again, watching her closely. "You work together?" I repeated, directing the question at her this time. For a moment, she didn't answer. It was the slightest delay, the kind most people wouldn't catch, but I wasn't most people. Then she nodded quickly, forcing a smile that was so out of place it made my stomach twist. Yeah, of course we do. This is Ben. He's new to the team. We've been working on a project together." The lie was so obvious it almost made me laugh. Almost. Ben, new coworker, just dropping something off. Yet he had no package, no folder, nothing in his hands. And the way she said his name, it wasn't casual. It wasn't the way you introduce someone you barely know. It had weight to it, something lingering just beneath the surface. I stepped back slightly, opening the door wider. "Well, if you're dropping something off, then go ahead." Ben's eyes flicked to Laura, and for the briefest moment, they exchanged a look filled with something unspoken, something I wasn't supposed to see. "Nah, it's okay," Ben said quickly, shaking his head. "It's not important. I'll just see you at work, Laura." And then, just like that, he turned and walked away, moving too fast, like he was escaping rather than leaving. I watched him go, my jaw tightening, my hands balling into fists at my sides. Then I turned back to my wife. "You gonna tell me what the hell that was?" Her smile was gone now. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran them through her hair. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice almost too quiet. It was nothing, but we both knew that wasn't true. And just like that, the first crack in our marriage had been exposed. I stood in the doorway for a long time after Ben left, staring at Laura as she fumbled with the knife on the counter, pretending to go back to chopping vegetables like nothing had just happened. The air between us had changed, thick with something unspoken, and I could feel my pulse in my ears, my body rigid with a tension I hadn't felt in years. I had spent over a decade with this woman, through every high and low, through arguments about money, stress over the kids, and sleepless nights worrying about the future. But in that moment, she felt like a stranger standing in our kitchen, acting like a bad liar in a situation she never expected to be in. The sound of the blade hitting the cutting board was uneven, her rhythm thrown off, and for a second, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all, how one knock at the door had changed everything. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, folding my arms as I watched her. "So, you want to tell me what that was?" I asked, my voice even, not pushing, just waiting. Laura's fingers tightened around the handle of the knife, and she let out a breath, still not looking at me. "I told you," she said, too quickly, her voice strained. "He's new at work. We've been working on a project together. He probably just got nervous coming by unannounced." "Yeah." I tilted my head, still watching her carefully. "That why he didn't bring anything with him? Not a folder, not a USB drive, not even a damn sticky note." She paused for just a fraction of a second before answering. "Another detail most people wouldn't have caught. Maybe he realized he forgot it," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't match the look in her eyes. "I don't know, Steve. You're acting like this is some big deal. It's not." I pushed off the door and took a step closer, not because I wanted to intimidate her, but because I needed to see her reaction up close. "Then why did you freeze up when you heard the knock?" She finally turned to face me, and for the first time since Ben had shown up, I saw something raw in her expression, something that wasn't just nerves, but something closer to panic. "I didn't freeze up," she said, shaking her head. "You're making this into something it's not. He's a coworker. That's it." I let the silence stretch between us, watching her closely. I had always trusted Laura. Never once in 12 years had I doubted her. Never once had I even entertained the thought of her betraying me. But trust doesn't just disappear overnight. It cracks, little by little, until one day you realize you're standing in the ruins of something you thought was unbreakable. And right now, that crack was forming, and no matter how badly I wanted to believe her, I couldn't ignore what was right in front of me. "You looked scared when you saw him," I said, my voice calm but firm. Not surprised, not annoyed, scared. Laura opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again, pressing her lips together. She shook her head and turned back to the counter, gripping the edge as if she needed to steady herself. "I wasn't scared. I just wasn't expecting him. That's all. I could have let it go. Maybe a few years ago, I would have. I would have trusted her word, told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid. But something about the way Ben had looked at her, something about the way she had looked at him, wouldn't let me. So if I call your office right now and ask about Ben, they'll confirm everything you just told me?" The way her shoulders tensed told me everything I needed to know before she even turned around. "Are you seriously going to do that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Should I have to?" I countered. She didn't answer. The silence between us felt like a battle, one she wasn't prepared to fight, but also wasn't willing to surrender. Her fingers tapped against the counter, her eyes darting to the clock on the wall, as if she was calculating something in her head. I could see it now, the hesitation, the way she was trying to find the right words to make this go away without giving away too much. "Look," she finally said, turning back to me, her expression softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't tell you about him because I knew how you'd react. You'd get suspicious for no reason, and I didn't want to deal with it." "So there is something to be suspicious about?" "No," she snapped, frustration flashing in her eyes. "Jesus, Steve, you're twisting my words. He's just a friend, okay? We've been talking a little outside of work, that's all. Nothing happened." The way she said nothing happened instead of nothing is happening made my stomach tighten. I exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over my face. "You're telling me a guy I've never heard of before just showed up at our house, looking like he was about to puke, for no reason? You expect me to believe that?" Laura's jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought she was going to lash out, to get angry enough to shift the blame onto me, to make this about my insecurities instead of whatever the hell was going on between her and Ben. But instead, she took a deep breath, her expression hardening. "I don't care what you believe," she said, her voice flat. I told you the truth. If you don't want to believe me, that's on you. I stared at her, waiting for the guilt, waiting for some sign that she knew she had just fed me a lie and felt bad about it. But it never came. She just held my gaze, challenging me to push further, daring me to make this into something bigger than she was ready for. So I didn't. I nodded slowly, stepping back. All right, I said, my voice neutral. If that's the truth, then I guess we're good. Laura blinked, caught off guard by my sudden retreat. We are? Yeah. I forced a small smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. I mean, you wouldn't lie to me, right? She hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. Right. I turned away, heading for the stairs. Good, I said over my shoulder. Because I think I'll look into it myself. I didn't have to turn around to know she was still standing there, frozen in place, her breath caught in her throat. I didn't need to see her face to know that, for the first time since this conversation started, she was really scared now. Laura didn't say a word as I walked up the stairs, but I could feel her eyes on my back, could hear the uneven rhythm of her breathing as she stood frozen in the kitchen. I closed the bedroom door behind me, not slamming it, not making a scene, just shutting myself off from her for a moment because I needed space to think. I wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. I wasn't the kind of man who let paranoia dictate his actions. But I was also not the kind of man who ignored what was right in front of him, and Laura's reaction had been enough to tell me that something was wrong. The way her body had stiffened when Ben knocked, the look they exchanged, the careful choice of words that she thought I wouldn't notice. She had lied. That much was obvious. What I didn't know yet was how deep that lie ran. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, replaying the moment over and over again in my head. The way Ben hesitated, the way his eyes darted toward her instead of me when he spoke, the way Laura barely even tried to cover it up. She had always been a terrible liar, something I had found endearing in the past. It used to mean she could never keep a surprise from me, never keep a secret about what she got me for my birthday or how she had accidentally broken something and replaced it before I could notice. But now, it meant that I could see right through her, and for the first time, I hated that about her. I wasn't going to sit there and let her control the narrative. I wasn't going to let her decide how much of the truth I deserved to know. If she wasn't going to tell me, I was going to find out myself. I pulled out my laptop and opened it, my hands moving with a calm I didn't actually feel. Laura wasn't stupid. If she was hiding something, she wouldn't have left a trail on her phone, at least not an obvious one. But work emails? Shared accounts? There were always cracks, always mistakes, always something left behind. The first thing I checked was our shared email, the one we used for bills and appointments, the one that was supposed to be neutral ground, free of anything personal. There wasn't much, just the usual bank statements, online receipts, a few reminders from the kids' school. But then I saw something that made my stomach tighten, a hotel booking confirmation from 3 weeks ago. It was under her name, paid for with her card, a single night at a hotel downtown. No mention of a conference, no emails about work events around that date. Just a single booking in the middle of the week, with no reason attached to it. I heard the bedroom door open behind me, and I didn't even bother closing the screen. Laura stepped inside, hesitant, watching me like she was trying to gauge how much damage I was about to do. "What are you doing?" she asked carefully, her voice softer now, as if she thought a gentler approach would make me back down. I turned the laptop toward her, letting her see the email. "You tell me." Her face paled, just slightly, but enough. She didn't rush to explain, didn't try to act like it was nothing. She just stared at it, her lips pressing into a thin line, her hands clenching at her sides. "Steve, don't lie to me again." I cut her off, my voice steady. But there was an edge to it now, something I wasn't trying to hide anymore. "You said nothing happened. You said Ben was just a coworker. So why the hell did you book a hotel room in the middle of the week?" She let out a shaky breath and finally sat down on the bed, rubbing her hands together, still not looking at me. "It's not what you think," she said, which was exactly what someone said when it was exactly what you thought. "Then explain it." She swallowed hard, staring at the floor like the answers were written there. I met Ben a few months ago at work. We got along, we started talking outside of the office, and yeah, it got a little too close. But nothing happened, I swear to you. The hotel." She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she should keep going. "It was supposed to happen. I booked it because I thought I wanted to. But I didn't go. I never checked in." I stared at her, my chest tightening. You thought you wanted to, I repeated slowly. She nodded, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans. I was confused. Things haven't been great between us, Steve. You know that. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. So that's what this is? Things weren't great, so you decided to line up a backup plan? It wasn't like that, she snapped, finally looking up at me, frustration flashing in her eyes. I was lonely. You've been distant, always busy, always tired, and Ben made me feel noticed. He made me feel like I wasn't invisible. I stared at her, anger and something else, something worse, building inside me. So what? That justifies it. That makes it okay to almost cheat. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, it doesn't. And I know I messed up, okay? I shouldn't have let it get that far. I shouldn't have let it become something. But I didn't sleep with him, Steve. I didn't. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to grab onto that one piece of her story that meant she hadn't actually crossed the final line. But how the hell was I supposed to do that when she had already crossed every other one? You were going to, I said, my voice hollow. If I hadn't found out, if something hadn't stopped you that night, you were going to. Laura opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't deny it. And that was enough. I stood up, my legs feeling heavier than they should, my hands curling into fists at my sides. I need some air, I muttered, heading for the door before she could say anything else. Steve, wait. I didn't. I walked out, down the stairs, out the front door, stepping into the night air that suddenly felt too cold, too sharp against my skin. My wife had betrayed me, maybe not in the most obvious way, maybe not in a way that left physical proof, but in a way that was just as devastating. She had wanted to. She had planned to. And if I hadn't found out, she would have. I took a deep breath, staring out at the darkened street, my mind racing with one simple question. What the hell was I supposed to do now? I stood outside for a long time, my hands on my hips, staring at nothing in particular. My mind kept circling the same thought over and over again, trying to figure out how the hell I had ended up here. Laura had been sitting at my dinner table, acting like nothing was wrong, acting like our life was the same as it had always been, and all the while, she had been planning to sleep with another man. I tried to convince myself that it mattered that she hadn't gone through with it, that she hadn't actually crossed that final line, but the more I thought about it, the less that seemed to mean. She had wanted to. She had booked the hotel, made the plans, built up the lie in her head so thoroughly that she was ready to go through with it. That was enough. That was all I needed to know. I turned back to the house and forced myself to go inside. Laura was still sitting on the bed, her hands clasped together, staring at the floor like a child waiting to be punished. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red, but I didn't feel a single ounce of sympathy for her. Whatever guilt she was feeling, whatever regret was eating away at her, it wasn't enough to erase what she had done. Are you going to say anything? She asked, her voice hesitant, like she was afraid of what I might do. I shut the door behind me, walking past her and leaning against the dresser. I just want to understand, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. At what point did you decide I wasn't enough anymore? Her eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. That's not what this was about. Then explain it to me, I said, folding my arms. Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what it looks like. Laura let out a shaky breath, running a hand through her hair. It wasn't like that, Steve. I wasn't looking for something else. It just happened. I clenched my jaw, exhaling through my nose as I forced myself to stay calm. Things like this don't just happen, I said, my voice harder now. You don't accidentally book a hotel room, Laura. You don't accidentally get so close to someone that you consider throwing away everything we built. She flinched at my words, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that looked like real fear. Maybe not fear of me, but fear of what came next. Fear of the fact that she had finally run out of ways to spin this into something less than what it was. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I laughed, shaking my head. You didn't mean to get caught. Her breath hitched, and she wiped at her face, shaking her head again like she could make this all go away if she just denied it enough times. I swear to you, Steve, I didn't sleep with him. I stopped myself before it got that far. Doesn't that count for something? Does it count for something? I repeated, staring at her in disbelief. No, Laura, it doesn't. You didn't stop because you realized it was wrong. You stopped because something made you hesitate. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear, maybe it was just bad timing, but it wasn't because of me. If I hadn't found out, would you have told me? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. That was all the answer I needed. I nodded, pushing off the dresser. That's what I thought. Steve, please, she said, standing up, reaching for me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. I know I messed up. I know I ruined everything. But I need you to understand that I never wanted this to happen. Yeah. I asked, my voice sharp now. Then why did it? She swallowed hard, shaking her head. I was lonely. I let out a bitter laugh. That's it. That's your excuse? You were lonely. You don't understand. No, Laura, I do understand. I cut her off, my patience gone. I understand that instead of talking to me, instead of telling me what you were feeling, you decided to find comfort in someone else. I understand that instead of working on our marriage, you decided to throw it away for some asshole you barely know. I understand perfectly. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I didn't care. I didn't care that she was sorry, or that she was scared, or that she suddenly wanted to fix things now that she had been caught. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice small now, like she was finally realizing that there was no coming back from this. I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the woman I had spent 12 years building a life with. The woman who had stood beside me through every struggle, who had laughed with me, fought with me, built a family with me. And yet, she had still chosen to betray me. It didn't matter that she hadn't gone all the way. It didn't matter that she had stopped herself. The intent had been there. The choice had been made. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I can't look at you the same way anymore. Her face crumpled at that, and she dropped onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. I didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there with nothing but the mess she had created. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, my mind caught between anger and exhaustion. The house was too quiet, but I could hear Laura moving upstairs, pacing, probably waiting for me to go back up, hoping I'd calm down and decide to forgive her just because she had managed to stop herself at the last second. She still didn't get it. She thought this was about whether she had physically crossed the line, about whether she had actually gone through with the betrayal, but it wasn't. It was about the fact that she had been willing to, that she had stood at the edge and was fully prepared to jump. She had only backed away because of some last-minute hesitation, not because she cared about what it would do to me, not because she had any real respect for our marriage, but because something had made her doubt the decision for herself. She hadn't chosen me. She had chosen uncertainty, and that wasn't the same thing. I checked my phone and saw that it was almost midnight. I should have been upstairs, in bed, getting ready for another day of work, another day of pretending life was normal, but there was no normal anymore. I opened a message thread that had been untouched for months, scrolling through old conversations before finally typing something new. Are you up? The reply came almost instantly. Yeah. What's going on? I hesitated for a second before responding. Can I come over? There was a short pause before the next message appeared. Of course. Doors open. I grabbed my keys and stood up, my body moving on autopilot. I didn't look toward the stairs, didn't care if Laura heard me leaving or not. She had made her choices. Now, I was making mine. The drive across town was quiet, the streets mostly empty, the occasional streetlight casting long shadows that I ignored. I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision, if this was the best way to handle things, but I knew that I couldn't sit in that house with her, couldn't pretend that we were still anything close to what we had been before tonight. My mind was running through everything I had ever known about her, every memory, every moment that now felt tainted, and I needed space to breathe, to clear my head before I said something I couldn't take back. I pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, sitting there for a second before stepping out. The porch light was on, the door slightly open, just as promised. I walked inside without knocking, shutting the door behind me as I turned to face the only person I could talk to right now. You look like shit, James said, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. I let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, shaking my head as I ran a hand over my face. Yeah, well, it's been that kind of night. James had been my best friend since college, the one person who knew me better than anyone, the one person I could count on to tell me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. He studied me for a moment before pushing a beer across the counter toward me. Tell me everything. I took the bottle but didn't drink, just held it in my hand as I leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. Laura was going to cheat on me. There was no reaction at first, just silence. but I could feel his posture shift slightly, his expression hardening. What do you mean was? She booked a hotel room. She planned everything. She was ready to go through with it. I said, my voice flat. But she backed out at the last second. She never actually slept with him. James let out a slow breath, setting his own beer down. And you believe that? I looked up at him then, and he must have seen something in my expression because he didn't ask again. Jesus, man, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't even know what to say. Yeah, me neither. We stood there in silence for a long time, the weight of the conversation settling between us. James had never liked Laura much, had never trusted her the way I did, but he had kept his mouth shut out of respect for me. I could tell he wanted to say I told you so, but to his credit, he didn't. So what now? He asked finally. I exhaled slowly, gripping the beer bottle a little tighter. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't stay in that house with her right now. James nodded without hesitation. You're not. You're staying here. I didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue about. You need to call a lawyer, James said after a moment. Even if you don't know what you want to do yet, you need to know your options. I knew he was right. I had been avoiding that thought since I walked out of the house, but there was no avoiding it now. Laura had already taken steps toward ending our marriage, even if she hadn't realized it yet. Whether I was ready to do the same or not didn't change the fact that I needed to be prepared. I'll call in the morning, I said, setting the beer down. Right now, I just need sleep. James clapped a hand on my shoulder, squeezing once before nodding toward the guest room. You know where everything is. I nodded, feeling exhaustion settle deep in my bones as I turned toward the hallway. But just before I reached the door, James spoke again. You're handling this better than I thought you would, he said, his voice quieter now. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. You don't know how I'm handling it yet, I said, opening the door and stepping inside. Because the truth was, neither did I. I woke up feeling like I had barely slept, but the clock told me it was already past 10 in the morning. It took me a second to remember where I was, the unfamiliar ceiling above me, the weight in my chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. I sat up slowly, rubbing my hands over my face before exhaling, my mind already running through everything waiting for me outside that door. The conversation I had been avoiding wasn't going anywhere, and I couldn't ignore it forever. I found James in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the news with the volume low. He turned when he heard me, nodding toward the pot on the counter. Made enough for you. I poured myself a cup, taking a slow sip before leaning back against the opposite counter. Neither of us spoke for a moment, the quiet stretching between us in a way that felt oddly comfortable. Did she call you? James asked finally. I shook my head, setting the cup down. Not yet. And are you going to call her? I stared at the dark liquid in my cup, thinking. Yeah, I admitted. But not to fix things. James nodded, as if he had been expecting that answer. So it's over. I let out a slow breath. It was over the second she decided I wasn't enough. James didn't say anything to that, just took another sip of his coffee before nodding toward my phone on the table. Then you should get it over with. I didn't argue. I picked up the phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Laura's name, my finger hovering over the screen for a second before I pressed call. It rang twice before she answered. Steve. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, like she didn't know if she was allowed to say my name anymore. I didn't waste time on small talk. I'm coming by to get some of my things, I said. I'll be there in an hour. There was silence on the other end, then a soft inhale. Okay. I hung up without saying anything else, slipping the phone into my pocket before grabbing my keys. James didn't try to stop me, didn't offer any last-minute advice, just gave me a nod as I walked past him and out the door. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the roads were clear, and for a brief second, I thought about what it would be like to pretend this never happened, to go back to the way things were before last night. But that wasn't an option. Laura had already changed everything, and no amount of pretending was going to erase that. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw her standing in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, like she had been waiting there since our call. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car and walking toward her, my steps steady, my hands relaxed at my sides. But inside, I felt nothing but finality. You can take whatever you need, she said softly as I reached the door, her voice careful, like she was afraid I might explode. I won't stop you. I didn't answer. I just stepped past her into the house, The place that had been mine for over a decade, but no longer felt like it belonged to me. Everything looked the same, smelled the same, but there was something different in the air now, something I wasn't going to let myself miss. I went upstairs, grabbing the things I knew I'd need: clothes, toiletries, my laptop. I packed efficiently, quickly, not letting my eyes linger on anything for too long. I wasn't here to think. I was here to leave. Laura stood in the doorway as I zipped the bag, her hands twisting together, her breathing uneven. "Steve," she started, but I held up a hand before she could say anything else. "Don't." Her lips pressed together, her eyes shining with something I didn't care to identify. Don't," I repeated, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "It doesn't matter what you have to say. It doesn't change anything." She swallowed hard, nodding. "So that's it." I met her gaze, steady and firm. "That's it." A tear slipped down her cheek, but I didn't reach for her, didn't comfort her. That wasn't my job anymore. I stepped past her, walking down the stairs without looking back, without giving her the chance to stop me. As I reached the front door, she spoke again, her voice shaking. "I do love you, you know." I paused for just a second before turning the knob, stepping outside, and letting the door shut behind me. I didn't need to answer, because if she had really loved me, none of this would have happened in the first place.